Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live, this is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Once again, this is our weekend edition, and we are so grateful that you can join us over the next couple hours. We're going to talk about all sorts of topics. Might just mention that we've posted a couple of articles, one by Dr. Merrill Matthews on the D.C. swamp is back, also one by Cal Thomas, Death, Debt, and Debauchery, and Michael Brown, Dr. Michael Brown, also why YouTube banning is so ominous. Somewhere along the line, I would like to get some comments from the former Virginia Governor Terry McAuliffe saying that I don't think parents should be telling schools what they should teach. I got a feeling I'm going to get a few comments around on that conversation. And we have many other topics here as well. Dr. Merrill Matthews with us, resident scholar for the Institute for Policy and Innovation.
Good to be with you, Kerby.
And Lathan Watts, who is the Director of Public Affairs. Lathan, good to have you with us.
Thanks for having me back.
And Dr. Merrill Matthews, have you noticed Lathan seems to be in an unbelievably good mood?
I have noticed that.
And it could be because he watched Arkansas beat Texas A&M last week. He was there in the end zone. We've seen a picture of him jumping up at the end of the game. And so this is something that, as an Arkansas resident, doesn't happen just every day.
No, it's been a long drought, and God bless Sam Pittman. That guy. I got to ride this as long as I can since we play Georgia tomorrow, and the streak is probably coming to an end tomorrow, but you never know. That was a great game. I was certainly proud of my Hogs, and it was good to be there and watch it live and in person, and I was even polite and humble to my Aggie friends that I was sitting with.
Which would be strange, because I've never seen you polite and humble.
Right? I know. I mean, it's wonders never cease.
It's going to be hard to get the snarky back again, because in addition to that, this man loves the Ryder Cup, and the Americans just whooped on individuals on the Ryder Cup. So this guy is just going to be no good at all. He's just in such a happy mood today.
Yeah, we beat them like redheaded stepchildren.
And, I was in California this week, and again, hello to our friends out there at KYCC, and some of the people in California say, I do not understand how football is almost like a religion. And I said, well, it's one thing in Texas, but if you go to Arkansas, of course, recently we were broadcasting from Birmingham. I mean, oh my goodness, Auburn, Alabama. This is really significant. If it's an SEC game, I mean, it is really intense.
It is. I mean, it is, pretty close to a religion in the Deep South. And, those especially those in-state rivalries like Bama and Auburn, it divides families. It divides churches. Like when I went to law school at Ole Miss, so I cheered for the Rebels as long as they're not playing Arkansas, because man can't change where he's from. But I can tell you, I have been at church services on like the Sunday morning leading up to the Saturday Ole Miss Mississippi State game, where there are families sitting on different sides of the auditorium.
I was in a restaurant in Birmingham.
Ole Miss people are over here, the state people are over here.
Yeah, I had Auburn on one side and Alabama on the other, in a barbecue restaurant, of all places. I mean, this is hilarious stuff. Well, anyway, that's enough football, but we just wanted to acknowledge that we do look at other issues besides politics. But Dr. Merrill Matthews, a couple of very good articles. By the way, I always encourage people to go to ipi.org. You've got really 4 points about the D.C. swamp, and I want wanted to spend some time kind of going through this because you talk about how the swamp was exposed, how the swamp works. Big stakes mean big bucks, and lobbying is a constitutional right but often abused. So kind of take us through this if you might.
Well, our listeners will remember that Donald Trump famously said he's going to drain the swamp. They used that as a campaign slogan, and it worked very, very well. He wasn't the first one to use it because Ronald Reagan and some others have used it, but not as effectively as Donald Trump did. I would argue that when Donald Trump was president, he really didn't drain the swamp, though I would argue he stirred it up a bit. But now that we've got the Democrats back in charge and the money that they're looking at spending, I say the swamp is back and it's bigger than ever. And what people need to understand about the swamp is, and different people have slightly varying definitions of what the swamp is. Is it corruption? Is it big money in politics? Is it lobbyists? And is it people who are just trying to benefit themselves rather than the American people? And I think it's sort of all of that.
All of the above.
But when Democrats put this much money, $3.5 trillion on the table, plus the infrastructure bill, which is $1 trillion or a little more, plus lots of new taxes and lots of new regulations, everybody and their dog is going to be affected by this. So businesses, organizations, trade associations, and so forth, they all get involved. So the businesses that are being hit, either they want to be in on the take, or they don't want to be taken. So they go to lobbyists, they go to the trade association. As well, you need to give money to these relative political candidates. So they give some money there. They take them out to eat. They try to convince them. They may convince them, may not convince them, but they feel like they have to keep the money flowing. All the dark money starts coming in, and you just got money and everything going around as people are trying to take advantage of this thing. In some cases, to get some of that money. In some cases, to keep from getting new taxes and so forth. And in a few cases, it's companies coming in saying, "We're doing this really well, but our competitor over here, they're the bad actors out here. So you need to pose taxes them or in charge fees or do something to regulate them to keep them from being so competitive and attracting all our customers." So it creates a real mess for it. And the only way you get rid of the swamp is that you scale down big government, you get so much of that money out of big government, let companies go and do their business, and that begins to sort of drain the swamp.
Yes. And again, having lived in Washington, D.C., when I went to Georgetown, they used to talk about the K Street lobbyists.
Yes.
And
they
so
still do.
a lot.
It's just K and L and M and several other streets
Right.
because K couldn't hold them all.
That's right. And that dates me because that goes back more than 30 years. But I mean, it's a good illustration of the fact that all of this idea of lobbying wasn't something that, say, James Madison had in mind when they were constructing the Constitution. But Lathan Watts, you've worked in politics enough to know that, again, the reason these pieces of legislation are so thick and the stack is this high for those watching online is because there are all sorts of little carve-outs and other kinds of situations which are some so specific that it actually targets and benefits just one company in a whole group of companies in that particular situation. And again, that's the way legislation is made, and it's one thing to see how sausage is made. It's quite another to see how it's made at Capitol Hill, right?
Yeah, that's exactly right. Two things you don't ever want to see made: sausage and legislation. And yeah, we used to have a saying when I worked in kind of the trade association world, to protect interests of companies, and typically it was to protect their way of doing business, their tax liability, the excess regulations. Is that if you're in politics, if you are not at the table, you are on the menu. And that is, if they really wanted to aptly name these spending and tax bills, they would title them the Lobbyist Employment Act, because that might be the only job Joe Biden ever creates.
I would say Lobbyist Enrichment Act.
Yeah, that works too. Yeah.
Yes. And again, you were making a case near the end here, Dr. Merrill Matthews, that lobbying is okay. I mean,
it's
is a constitutional.
Absolutely.
Sure, it is. But also you make the case that it can be abused, and it certainly has.
Yes, it certainly has. And it's gotten a bad name. People just sort of hate lobbyists now.
I remember one time when I registered for a lobbyist, and that's back in the state of Oregon, my mother told somebody and was like, "Oh, you'd think I just joined the Communist Party."
Right.
The way they were reacting. But again, that had to do with student politics of all things. But it's a good illustration of that, and a very good piece. Matter of fact, a little bit later, we're going to be talking about another one by Dr. Merrill Matthews, but we thought we'd start out. If you wonder about the D.C. swamp, it's back. And as he says, it's swampier than ever. We'll be right back.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Caldwell Swice admits that reaching your secular friends with the gospel is difficult, but there are things we can do to be more effective. He and I have worked together at the International Society of Christian Apologetics, so I was excited to see many commentators like Ed Stetzer and Eric Metaxas quoting him. Caldwell says we make a mistake when we ignore the trends and zeitgeist of the times, and we make grave mistakes when we try to stereotype people into this or that category. Sometimes the best starting point is to ask a question. When someone tells him that they don't believe in God, he asks, "What God do you not believe in?" He says that 9 times out of 10, it is usually a God that we Christians don't believe in. He has 3 principles we should adopt so that we can be more effective in reaching our secular friends. First, we must engage. He says we should sit at the table where we have the attention of your secular friends. Connect with them by getting involved with Apple computers, with Congress, or with sports. We'll be more effective if we sit at the table where most decisions are made by government, culture, media, and education. Second, we must inquire. That means we need to turn the table to listening and asking good questions. The Bible admonishes us to let your speech always be gracious and seasoned with salt. He tells of a student who told him that he did not believe in anything that is not physical. Khaldun asked him if his idea was physical. After all, not believing in anything that is non-physical is a non-physical idea. Third, we should edify. That means we should reach across the table and learn to love people redemptively. The gospel is ultimately about relationships, and we can demonstrate the truth of the gospel through love. These principles will help you be more effective in reaching your secular friends. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Go deeper on topics like you hear on Viewpoints by visiting pointofview.net. Pointofview.net.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, if you'd like to join the conversation at any point, 1-800-351-1212. Dr. Merrill Matthews, Lathan Watts with us as well. Might just mention my booklet on the deep state kind of gets you into the idea of the swamp as well. And it was interesting that all the time that you would have Donald Trump talk about the deep state, everybody go, there's no deep state. And then just shortly before Joe Biden came into office in January, you have this article in the Washington Post wondering if some of the deep state from Trump might affect Biden. I thought, all of a sudden now we have a deep state again,
Yes.
And so that's another aspect. But this first article really would be one that I would commend to you. It's in the Hill, but also we have it linked to IPI.org. The D.C. swamp is back, and it's swampier than ever. But I thought we'd go to our resident historian, Lathan Watts, although all three of us probably could tell the story. But Lathan, I'll let you have the honors. When we hear the word lobbying, people wonder, where did that phrase come from, the idea of actually doing this in a lobby?
Right. So it actually goes all the way back to President Grant, Ulysses S. Grant. Sort of the word got around D.C. when he was president that he had kind of an afternoon ritual, and to kind of clear his head, he would take a walk, and on the way back to the White House, he always stopped at the Willard Hotel, which is a great hotel, still there. You can still stay there.
Right by the White House.
Right by the White House.
And I think Dr. Merrill Matthews has been there many a time.
I've been there.
Yes.
But he would stop there on his way back to the White House and usually have either a brandy and a cigar or something like that. And word got out that he did that every day. And so if you wanted to get the ear of the president, you hung out in the lobby of the Willard Hotel. When the president showed up, you made your way over there, made your case on his way back to the White House. And that's where we get the term lobbying. It was hanging out in the lobby of the Willard Hotel.
And so, again, there was a much easier opportunity to contact a president than you would find today. But it's still used because also they use the lobbies in Capitol Hill, if you've been there. And there is a lot of situation for any of you who've ever even had a tour of the White House or Capitol Hill or anything like that. You recognize there's some places where you can meet individuals. Oftentimes in the White House, it's in the Executive Office Building. On Capitol Hill, of course, it's right there in the Capitol itself. And as somebody comes and votes, they might get a person, grab them for a minute and talk with them, or want to go back with them to their office or meet them in an office to make the case. And nothing necessarily wrong with that, Dr. Merrill Matthews. It's just that after a while it gets abused.
Right. And you want, in a representative democracy, you want to be able to go to your members of Congress, elected officials, and make your case for something, against something, or whatever. But it's been so abused, and it's been abused as more money and so forth is coming out of the federal government.
Yes. And I did commentaries a while back in which I pointed out there were some things lurking in some of these pieces of legislation, which Nancy Pelosi famously said, we'll have to read the bill to find out what's in it.
Obamacare,
and
yes.
there are some that are so obscure that it will change a line in the Federal Register for organizations that have this much revenue, and you begin to say, okay, that is this corporation, and actually it's just one individual that's actually singled out, but the person's name is not in the bill, but it's written in such a way that one individual, one corporation gets a tremendous benefit or carve out or something like that.
And one of the things that happens is as they're throwing these, if you can work on a bill over several months, you have time to go through it and look. We're looking at a $3.5 trillion bill that they were hoping to be able to vote for in the last couple of days, and they were still trying to craft it. They don't know what's going to be in it. And so you've got something that's going to be thousands of pages, and they still don't know what's in it, and they try to slap it together and put it together, and then they go and vote on it. And you find in there words and so forth, things that people pop up later and say, that's in there. And typically there's a thing called a technical corrections bill.
Right.
So you come up afterwards and you say,
they just had one of those.
We put something in here. We didn't mean to say it quite that way. And so we need to do a technical correction. And they come back and make those kinds of changes. But when you do something like this, it gets so bad. And there was one back in the 90s where they had meant to say that a person on Medicare could go to a doctor and pay for it out of pocket. They didn't have to go through Medicare, because Medicare was saying you cannot go to a doctor and pay for something out of pocket if you are on Medicare. You're prohibited from doing that. And so they tried to put it in the legislation to say you could, but then somebody at the very last minute said, if the doctor's willing to forego seeing any Medicare patients for 2 years. Well, 96% of non-pediatricians have to see Medicare patients, sometimes at the hospital or something like that. What it meant was it ended up doing exactly the opposite of what they wanted to do. And then when they called us in to talk about it and so we said, well, I think it's no problem. Just do a technical correction. So, well, we don't want to do that because Democrats are going to say we're trying to hurt seniors. So this day, 24 years later, it is still the law.
Isn't that amazing? There's just a good example of that. And again, the size of these are huge. Think of the books that you hope that your English teacher would never assign. The one that comes to mind is War and Peace. 1,400 pages. Close second, though, and my producer was reminding me of that, Count of Monte Cristo, which is 1,300 something. Those pale in comparison to this bill, which is more than 2,500 pages. So you can,
and at least War and Peace is understandable.
Right. And so you begin to understand that they're lurking in there are things like, if you ever spend even $600 or write a check for $600, you know what I'm talking about here. I'll come to you, Lathan. Then all of a sudden the IRS wants oversight over everything in your bank, and $600, that's probably most of the listeners to Point of View.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's hidden in there with a lot of other stuff in this $6.5 trillion supposedly infrastructure and spending plan. Things like that, forcing banks to monitor report all transactions of more $600 or more.
That's just amazing.
And they're pouring money. They're giving money to newspapers. I was reading about this yesterday. There's money in there to go to larger newspapers to, in essence, bail them out because, as our listeners know, newspapers have been struggling now for several years if people have moved to online. I think I'm maybe the last person in Dallas who actually takes a hard copy of the Dallas Morning News. But it's because I like the old hard copies, but newspapers are struggling, and yet apparently if they pass this bill, like as it stands, taxpayers will be bailing out newspapers, which are for-profit companies.
Yeah, and another term that gets thrown around for these kinds of bills is we call them Christmas trees.
Oh my goodness! And they have a lot of ornaments.
Because exactly right. The Democrats are having trouble even getting all of their people in line to vote for this, and so when you got a bill that there's something in it you really need to pass, but you got people that are reluctant to, then you go to that member of Congress or that senator and go, what do you need in order to vote for this? And, well, I need this for my district. I need this for my state. All of a sudden, people start adding stuff on it, hence the Christmas tree. Then you've got this ornament for this state, this ornament for this district, all of this stuff. And like Dr. Matthews said, it becomes this behemoth that they then get, like maybe the day before, that they're supposed to read 2,500 pages and know what they're voting for. And you're right. I mean, it's longer than War and Peace, and usually not quite. War and Peace isn't as depressing as as the stuff that's in this thing.
And it's intentionally obscured because, like it will say, line 47 on page 58 of the, and the whole
you have
issue.
To go someplace.
You got to look at the Federal
law.
Register. You got to turn to that page. We've had Dr. Merrill Matthews, individuals on this program, and I'll use Louis Gohmert as an example, trying to read the Affordable Care Act and just talking about the number of hours it would take just to make your way through 10 pages. And even if you assume that you could read a page an hour or even a page a minute, you start playing the game, and then how many 2,500 hours, 2,500 minutes, and that nobody is reading this and has even a clue as to what it is. So that leads to one other question before we end that. Somebody writes them, and I know the members of Congress didn't write them, so where did this come from?
Well, the members of Congress, their staff has this stuff, and they'll come up with some kind of legislation. They'll put it, with computers these days, of course, you can put this stuff in there and you can kind of go back and tweak it a little easier than you could in the prior days. But also the lobbyists are oftentimes involved in this, and sometimes you'll find out that here's what the lobbyists sent them, and it's almost word for word within the bill.
Yeah, and that's what I wanted you to bring up as well, because you sort of allude to that, but I think it's just important to recognize, because I've had people when we travel, and lately I've, of course, been at a lot of places where we have listeners to Point of View because we're doing some of these broadcasts, and the people say, who writes this pieces of legislation? I said, well, it's a mix and match, but some of it is so-called model legislation by the lobbyist that just show up word for word in there, and the only person that really understands that is the lobbyist, and sometimes the staffer goes, it looks good enough for me, and so pretty soon you have these 2,500-page behemoths that you talked about. When we come back from the break, you might say, well, is Congress passing anything? Oh, yeah, the House of Representatives voted on the Women's Health Protection Act to actually establish a federal right to abortion far beyond Roe versus Wade. And also then we've been talking about moderate Democrats, but good piece that just came out, Newsweek, the myth of the moderate Democrats. And so we'll get into some of those issues, and there are many issues that we will be addressing today. So if you find yourself saying, okay, these guys are talking too fast, I want to learn some more about that, these are the articles we're working our way through, and you can find them at pointofview.net. Let's take a break. We have a lot more to cover, especially as we look at what's happening in Congress right now, and we'll talk about that right after this.
Having civil conversations about important issues seems to be harder and harder. Various media outlets tell people what they should believe, why they should be outraged, and getting people to actually think, well, it can be difficult. Whether it's the gospel, tax issues, social policy, or just about anything else, you need to have solid information and clear thinking to address the hard issues. You need God's truth applied. And that's what you get in less than 2 minutes with Point of View's Viewpoints Commentary, a daily resource to help you be informed and think through the things we need to be talking about. It is free and will arrive in your inbox each day when you visit pointofview.net/sign-up. Sometimes we know we should say something, but we're silent because we're not quite sure what to say. Viewpoints Commentary can help you break the silence and change the narrative. It can make you a more equipped agent for truth. Get your free subscription to the Viewpoints Commentary at pointofview.net/sign-up. pointofview.net/sign-up. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again, is Kerby Anderson.
One of the things we're doing today is talking a little bit about what's going on in Congress. That's kind of front and center. We will get to some other issues. Obviously, we've got immigration. Obviously, we've got the banning of YouTube, and we'll get to that as our third article, and some other issues. Certainly want to get some comments about whether or not parents can have any influence in the public education arena. But the one I wanted to post here is by Cal Thomas, because a number of people have been quoting this piece, and he, of course, shows up in various newspapers. I think this one came from the Washington Times. Debt, death, and debauchery, radical Democratic Party running amok. And he starts out by saying that now with this latest vote in which the House of Representatives saw that no Republican voted for the Women's Health and Protection Act, and all Democrats but one, Henry Cuellar in Texas. And so this would establish a federal right to abortion. We've talked about this before because this would be far beyond Roe versus Wade. Roe versus Wade allowed for third trimester banning of abortion and various kinds of things like informed consent, 24-hour waiting period. This one is so much more radical. But the point he's making now is that with this, now you have the party of death, debt, and debauchery, because we've been talking about the debt. $3.5 trillion on, of course, what'll be a continuing resolution, which I guess has to start today since we just ended the fiscal year. And then also the issue of debauchery in terms of just getting rid of all sorts of various, if you will, traditional values. And, of course, what's been going on in the southern border. If you sat down and tried to mess up our culture and our country, Lathan Watts, I just don't know that you could do a better job than what's been taking place over the last couple of months.
Yeah, that's for sure. And I think this bill is also probably a response to the Supreme Court taking the case out of Mississippi, the Dobbs versus Jackson Whole Health, where they're going to, at least in theory, address the issue of abortion. And this is kind of how the legislative branch talks to the judicial branch.
Yeah.
The Supreme Court comes out with a decision that's unpopular. Sometimes Congress will take action, like Employment Division versus Smith comes out. Then you get the Religious Freedom Restoration Act.
Good point.
I think that at least in part, this is the Democrat Party responding maybe preemptively to the Supreme Court taking the Dobbs case, and knowing that the Supreme Court's going to address abortion in this term. I think they're trying to show, the will of the people, quote unquote, is this. And that's kind of an overt attempt at influencing probably John Roberts on this issue.
Likely, yeah.
But their mistake is that what they've demonstrated is just how divided the country is on the issue. Because, as you said, they could not get a single Republican to vote for it, and not even their entire caucus voted for it. Now, it was only one guy from Texas, but he is likely voting his district. He knows his district is probably split on that issue at best, more reasonable on the issue than the radicals in his party are. And it would be dangerous for him in his own reelection in his district if he was on record voting for this. So they've sort of maybe inadvertently sent the message to the court that the public opinion is hardened on this issue, and if the Supreme Court decided the Dobbs case in a way that either overturned Roe or undermined it to the point that it was basically overturned, it would theoretically return that issue to the states. And so, Dems, if you want to live in a state where there's abortion on demand up to and including, the day of birth, then go to a state that has that. If you want to live in a state that protects life, go to a state that does. That would likely be the outcome of a decision by the Supreme Court that either overturned Roe or, without expressly doing it, in actuality did, and would return that issue to the states. So I think this is. Some of it is just pure politics. It's a show vote. They know that bill's not going anywhere in a 50-50 Senate. It gives their, the more radical elements of their caucus something to go back home and campaign on. But it also gives the ours something to go back home and campaign on. So look what these guys are doing.
Yes.
So I don't, like many things that the current Speaker of the House does, I don't see too much wisdom in doing this. But it is what it is.
Because, if you are a, quote, moderate Democrat, we're going to get to that in just a minute, and you got to go defend that, and we're going to talk about some other votes you're going to have to defend.
So Cal Thomas gave us 3 Ds.
Yes.
Let me add a 4th one, default.
Yes.
Because we may be facing that sometime in the near future.
Thank you for bringing that up.
That's another one. And I would go one more, those 4 Ds leading to defeat. I don't think the Democrats realize how much they are upsetting the country right now.
I don't think so.
And and
If
we've
you
got
live
a
in your
year,
own
so
silo.
things can change in a year. But my goodness, I think they're looking at a catastrophic defeat come 2022 in the House and Senate if they don't change their ways. And they can't change Joe Biden. he's there. They've got to deal with that. And so the things they're trying to do right now, I think, are just fundamentally bad politically, and just the size of this legislation. I think we're probably at a stage, and we've probably been this way for a little while, where it's just almost impossible to get great, big, sweeping bills through anymore.
God willing.
Let's hope not.
Ideally, you ought to be,
Targeted.
You want to target these things. If we have a problem with health care, we have a problem with home care, with Medicaid, with education or something, you target the bill, you get some bipartisan support, and you get that, and then you rack up some wins and some losses probably, but then you have some things you can win. Joe Biden's not going to be able to go back. I mean, maybe he gets the infrastructure bill through. It's not entirely clear. I think the $3.5 trillion is probably going to go down. I mean, Joe Manchin said, well, I'll go $1.5 trillion. We're talking about $1.5 trillion. But Bernie Sanders said, I've already compromised. I wanted $6 trillion. I already made concessions to go to $3.5 trillion. So it's not clear to me they get those things through. Maybe the infrastructure bill, but there's not a lot of wins for Joe Biden right now.
Yes, please nobody tell the Democrat leadership that there is a number higher than trillion. Let's just.
I got to say, I actually pulled out my calculator the other day because I was doing this, and my calculator doesn't go that high.
Yeah, you can't get it on there.
I can't get it on there. You get an error on the thing.
You do.
So you sit there and think, well, we're going to have a whole new set of calculators if Democrats keep being in office.
That is amazing. Next time I talk to Cal Thomas, I'm going to say, you talked about death, debt, and debauchery, but we see you those three and give you three more from Dr. Merrill Matthews: deception, default, and defeat. Exactly. So we got 6. I may just put that in a commentary. We started with 3 and ended up with 6, which brings us to one other one. And Peter Roth, you know him, and every once in a while he sends in advance so I know what's going to show up. And today, I believe, in Newsweek, you can see his piece on the myth of the moderate Democrats. Well, if you say that these Democrats are moderate and they all vote for the most radical abortion piece, that would be enough. But Peter Roth goes on to say, former House Speaker Newt Gingrich pointed out that in a recent policy document, virtually every Democrat in the House and Senate voted for a budget outline produced by Senator Bernie Sanders, a self-identified socialist. So when you start looking at votes that are more radical than almost 90% of the American people, maybe that brings you back to that D called defeat, don't you think?
Yeah, I think so. I think just as Dr. Matthews said, I mean, you probably get tired of hearing me saying, just like the Republicans are the best at forming circular firing squads, the Democrats are the best at overreaching.
Yes.
And I think they do it because they are willing to risk political losses in order to get a policy that they want in place.
It's so hard to overturn it.
Because once it's there, it is not getting, and they did it. They did it with Obamacare.
Yeah.
I mean, everybody remembers, Scott Brown running in Massachusetts to be the vote that stopped Obamacare. They knew they were going to lose the Senate over that issue, and they did it anyway because they knew if we get it done, you cannot get rid of it.
And the amazing thing here, if they had huge majorities in the House and Senate, okay, then you have a mandate. They have got, 3 or 4 votes majority in the House and no majority in the Senate.
Right.
And yet they claim that's a mandate to do the most radical legislation we have ever seen. It's mind-blowing.
When we talk about moderate Democrats, since I'm the old guy around the table, I can remember Sam Nunn, moderate Democrat out of Georgia, Scoop Jackson, moderate Democrat out of Washington. All of you guys know very well Phil Gramm, who was a Democrat, then became a Republican. But it's hard to even, with too much comment, say that Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema are, but they at least are the closest thing you have now to what used to be quite frequently moderate Democrats.
And of course, Sam Nunn was, I would call a moderate Democrat from Georgia. His daughter ran for the Senate as a liberal. I mean, she was much further to the left than him.
But again, and part of it is that in the old days, Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema, now that are seen, they're called right wing, and they're called actually supporting coal and all sorts of stuff. number of epithets that are headed in their direction are horrific.
And yet
those used to be middle of the road, weren't they?
I mean, you've gone too far as a party when the moderate is the guy in favor of the $1.5 trillion in spending.
We have one more to cover, but we have a mandatory break, so we'll come back and talk about how they're wanting to spend your tax revenues. We'll come right back.
When global warming began losing credibility as an environmental catastrophe, the left substituted the term climate change because there is no doubt that the climate is changing. It always has. Progressives act very panicky and claim that if they get enough money and power, they can somehow lessen the bad effects of climate change. Their real goal, however, is to re-engineer the entire energy economy. Of the $3.5 trillion in the White House and Congress's proposed spending bill, about $2 trillion is reportedly earmarked for climate-related measures. Much of the spending is aimed at getting American companies and individuals to quit using fossil fuels. They claim this will reduce global temperatures, but their studies show only minimal reductions. Fossil fuels are still the best way to provide cheap, abundant, and reliable electricity, and innovation is making them cleaner all the time. Renewables, namely wind and solar, are not always available when you need them. It's expensive and often impossible to obtain the electricity to back them up. Hence, in California, environmentalists poster child for central planning, blackouts are a near daily event. The Wall Street Journal reported record sales of home generators to Californians this summer. As millions of Californians leave a state where joblessness, cost of living, and overregulation are making their lives harder, Congress is actually considering 2 bills which take California's policies national. The Senate's $1 trillion bill for infrastructure provides a down payment on the effort to banish carbon from the U.S. economy. The proposal tasked Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg with rolling out a national electric vehicle charging network. EVs are more expensive even with government subsidies. Yet, as the Journal explains, liberals believe that building more chargers in low-income areas will encourage more EV sales. This type of incentive has failed in California. This EV push is just one of many drastic transformations funded by the legislation being considered in Washington, D.C. Central planning cannot spawn a thriving economy. We should not fund such arrogance. For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for a few more minutes, and next hour we're going to get into some of these other issues. Of course, the banning of YouTube there of anything that talks about vaccines, a couple of other issues related to that. But I thought since we spent so much time on Congress, we might just answer a question some people might have. And Dr. Merrill Matthews, you see Joe Manchin of West Virginia, and some people might say, well, what's the sticking point there? Well, West Virginia is the issue. But something else that we talked about off air, the whole spectrum of the Democratic Party has moved. People say the Republicans have moved. Not really. I mean, in some respects, you can see by looking at even the 2000 and 2008 Republican platform, really not that different when indeed you had Donald Trump running for election or running for re-election. The Democratic platform is very different. And we just mentioned a minute ago, our listeners in Georgia might remember years ago, moderate Democrat like Sam Nunn, people in Washington State, Scoop Jackson. We mentioned Phil Gramm. Another one, which I know that Lathan's worked with, Rick Perry, He used to be a Democrat, didn't he?
Yes, he did.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And he actually was on a campaign chairman for Michael Dukakis, wasn't that
Al
right?
Gore.
Al Gore, that's right, Al Gore.
And West Virginia is interesting because it used to be such a Democratic stronghold. Robert Byrd, longtime senator from West Virginia. I think half of West Virginia is named after Robert Byrd.
Very true.
But he was I would not call him he was a liberal, but not. I mean, he was in the sort of the moderately liberal sort of thing. He was not a conservative Democrat.
No,
but he was for maintaining the priority and the prerogatives of the Senate, which Harry Reid and others have been sort of seeding out because they wanted to. It's an interesting shift that's gone on in West Virginia as it has become much more conservative, but primarily because Democrats have moved so far to the left.
Let's, if we can, Lathan, just talk about the fact that you have a Joe Manchin, West Virginia. Let's talk about one other, Kyrsten Sinema, Arizona. These are kind of purple states, but what would happen if we didn't have them? And when I go to firstliberty.org, I see some things about packing the court, a filibuster. There are a lot of wish lists that I know Bernie Sanders and others would love to have implemented, Elizabeth Warren and others. And in some respects, they're the only thing preventing some of that from happening, aren't they?
They are, and that gives them tremendous political power within their party because they are the sticking point. The leadership is going to always have to come to them and go, what is it going to take? Right? what is it going to take to get you to support this? What's it going to take to get you to support that? And as long as they hold the line on the filibuster rules, then a lot of this stuff dies in the Senate because it is a 50-50 split and they can't get 60 votes, together. And I think kind of similar to Byrd, they understand the value of the filibuster rule. If you've ever been in the minority in the Senate, you understand the value of the filibuster rule.
Sure. And
I think they are taking a longer term approach. And they may be looking at, it does not look good for us in 2022, and we may be about to be right back in the minority, and we're going to want this rule in place when we're in the minority.
Learned a lesson from Harry Reid, didn't they?
If Republicans take over the Senate in 2022, Democrats will be the biggest supporters of the filibuster.
That's right.
There are.
That's right.
Just as they were in about 2017 or so when the Republicans had control of the Senate.
Yeah. That's exactly it. And,
there you go.
And you're right to point out that West Virginia and Arizona are kind of purple states. They will go red on a presidential and blue in things down the ballot, and so. The people so Manchin and Sinema, they have to take that into account. When they're in D.C., they cannot vote, just toe the party line because the party line is so out of touch with the people of their state, even the Democrats in their state, that if they do, they are looking at losing their seat in a general election. And I think they understand that. There are probably still some conservative Democrat voters in those states, even if, to the point of the piece, there may not be conservative Democrat elected officials anymore.
Right.
People like Manchin understand, what's going to play well in West Virginia and what's not. And when you talk about, an environmental agenda in the Democratic Party that would be the death of the coal industry, and you look what one of the major employers in the state of West Virginia is, of course he's not going to vote for that.
Yeah.
You're not ever going to get him on board for that. And so, it makes he and Sinema probably two of the most powerful people in Washington, D.C. right now. I think Manchin kind of likes being in that spot. He might protest about all the pressure that he's under, but he's a very, very influential man right now.
He certainly is. He also asked a question the other day. We have 11 million jobs that we haven't filled, 8 million people still unemployed. Something's not matching up here. Anybody have any reason why we have so many people that aren't filling those jobs?
Well, it's interesting. When you look at the labor force participation rate, that's different than the unemployment rate. Unemployment rate, you have to be looking for a job. Under the labor force participation rate, they just look at the percentage of people who could be working and what percentage that is. It had been very high in the early 2000s. It had dropped significantly, especially during the financial crisis. It really took a dive during the when the pandemic started, but it came back up a good bit. But for the last several months, it has been basically going flat. So we're well under the number of people who are in the labor force who would have been back then. I think we've sort of talked about the notion that some of the unemployment benefits and other things may have discouraged if I can get this much money without working when I go to work, that may have played a role in it. We're seeing those benefits change. But if you're looking at this and you're saying there's $3.5 trillion that Congress is looking at, and they're going to give me all kinds of benefits, so why don't I hold out a little longer for looking for a job? Because maybe they'll get this passed and I'll get a lot more money coming in. But I'll also add that the number of people who've gone out and started businesses since the sort of the bottom of the pandemic has gone up significantly. It's like it's nearly 3 times what it was in terms of people starting new businesses that we saw in just the past few months.
Again, National Federation of Independent Business, they conduct a monthly survey of small businesses, and the August results, a 48-year record high, 50% reported job openings that could not be filled. And if you travel around, and boy, I sure saw them in California last week, this week as well, but I see them almost anywhere we've gone. You go into a restaurant and they say, we're closing at 8 o'clock. Or you see, well, what about those tables? Well, we don't have anybody to cover those tables. So you have sometimes in some of these restaurants, some of these stores, half of the people that they would like to have actually serve. It is a huge
problem. And it's not just, it's various parts because of the supply chain. So if you're making a couch, but you can't get the foam rubber, then you can't get the couch out. And in that area, they're saying, it may be, if you go to order a new couch, it may be 6 to 8 months before you can get it. My mother-in-law, her oven went out. She bought a new one, but it was 6 months before the new oven got in. She had to go for 6 months using the microwave.
We had to go for a while before we got a new refrigerator that went out on us. And again, now that I've had a chance to see some of the ports, there are ships out there, and they're just full of goods, but they can't get them unloaded.
Can't get them unloaded?
It is something like, I heard this just the other day driving into work, that almost every shipping container available in the world is in use right now.
Right.
But they're not being all unloaded by longshoremen. They can't get in because there's not people to unload them.
Yeah.
You've got things like totalitarian, I wouldn't say regimes, but measures to deal with COVID in places like Vietnam, where they've been on a military lockdown for 40-something days.
Look
people
at Australia,
can't leave their house.
New Zealand, yeah.
And how many of the goods that we import to this country are made in Vietnam? Well, if the people can't get out of their house to go to the factory can't run. It can't produce the goods. And that's why it's taking 6 months to get, something that you ordered.
And if you get it, it has trouble getting delivered once you get it unloaded at the dock.
Right.
Well, we're trying to give you some explanation for all the things that are happening in your world. And so when we come back, we'll get into some other issues as well. Have a phone call. We'll certainly take some phone calls, and maybe we've stimulated your thoughts. So if you'd like to give us a call, we'll put you on hold and see if we can get to you after the break. We are, again, talking about a lot of issues, but you can find the articles we're mentioning on the website, pointofview.net, and we'll be right back.
We live in a digital generation. Point of View is reaching this often overly plugged-in generation with truth. You can keep up with us 24 hours a day using your phone, your tablet, your laptop, or your desktop. Search for the Point of View Radio Talk Show on Facebook, where you can keep up with today's issues, learn about current and upcoming guests by liking us on Facebook. Also, follow us on Twitter. Our handle is @Point of View RTS. That stands for Point of View Radio Talk Show. Learn, interact, make a difference with Point of View using new media. And here's one way you can make a big difference. Help us increase our reach by spreading the word among your friends. Share a Facebook post. Tag us in a tweet. With enough joining us to plant seeds, we'll see a tremendous harvest. Come on, it only takes a minute. Search for Point of View Radio Talk Show on Facebook, @Point of View RTS on Twitter, and subscribe to the Point of View Radio Talk Show channel on YouTube. Learn, interact, share. The Point of View Radio Talk Show. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do.
in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of view, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I think y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. Each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live, this is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Second hour in studio with us today, Lathan Watts, as well as Dr. Merrill Matthews. And before we're done, we'll talk about their two websites. I encourage you to support both of these organizations. They do such a good job. And we'll start taking some phone calls, 1-800-351-1212. But, as we're talking about the Senate, I know for some people they're saying, well, the election is not till November 2022. But you, of course, have some primaries. And it is true that, of course, Republicans have to defend some of these seats. But if you look at these close elections, for example, Senator Mark Kelly, 2%. Senator Warnock, 2%. Maggie Hassan, a fraction of a percent. New Hampshire. You can add Nevada. There are a lot of vulnerable, if you will, Democratic senators. There are a few vulnerable Republicans, Roy Blunt in Missouri, maybe Pat Toomey in Pennsylvania. But in some respects, this doesn't help if you're taking some really difficult votes. $3.5 trillion vote, another $1 trillion for infrastructure, and then you're voting for issues like abortion and everything else. Of course, they didn't have to have that vote in the Senate. But these are issues that are going to surface pretty quickly, even in the primaries, much less the general election, don't you think?
And, I think this election, even though Joe Biden won't be on the ballot, he will be indirectly on the ballot.
Yes.
And so I think he's done such a poor job. I think Afghanistan is going to haunt him for months, maybe years. Depending upon what happens here, the coronavirus, of course, he came in saying, I've got a plan to defeat the coronavirus. He came in, basically embraced Donald Trump's plan and the vaccines, and now the coronavirus has been up. It looks like it may be peaking here in the Delta variant, so we may be seeing some, and of course the good news today from Merck saying that they've got a treatment that looks like it's very effective.
Like a pill, yeah.
So some of this may work in his favor. We hope we do have a treatment for the coronavirus.
Yeah.
But at any rate, there's just several things where he has gone wrong on, and the Democratic Party is pulling him so far to the left. I just think Joe Biden won because he wasn't Donald Trump.
Yeah.
He ran as a moderate. He's not governing as a moderate, but he ran because I vote for me. I'm not Donald Trump. But Donald Trump is maybe on the ballot in 2022 in some ways, and by the people he's supporting. But it's just interesting. I think it's going to be a very, very tough election for them next year.
Yeah. The first midterm election after a president is elected, whether he's new in office or he's just been reelected, the first chance that people have to get to go to the polls for federal elected offices, it's a referendum on that president. Mm-hmm. I mean, no matter if
there's buyer's remorse,
right. I mean, obviously,
and they almost always lose in that.
Yeah, historically, you lose seats in the midterms. In that first midterm, people, like you said, there's some buyer's remorse, or the party that lost the presidential election is more energized than the party that won, and they motivate more people to get out to vote. But it is, there's no getting around it. It's a referendum on the president and his agenda. And especially if you're the president, and even though he has, very slim margins, he's got control of the legislature as well. So it's a referendum on whatever he has put in place in those first 2 years. And, Dr. Matthews is right. It has been one disaster after another. Here we are just, 9-10 months in. And, another year is a long time in politics. And just like Dr. Matthews said, he could have some successes, but if they were holding this, he's just lucky that we can't do like snap elections like they do in the UK and call it a parliamentary election. Because if they called one right now, it would be an absolute bloodbath. And these D's and these Senate seats that are in close races, it would not go well for them. So that first election is always a referendum.
And, there's people like Barack Obama. He lost big in the first midterms, but you sort of had the sense he's still on his game. He's still sharp. You may disagree with some of his policies, but he's still in control and knows what he's doing. There's this growing sense that Joe Biden is just not all there anymore, just 6 months in. And I don't mean this real critically, but he just doesn't seem to have a handle on things, and going to sleep in meetings and other things, it just doesn't look good.
He forgot the name of the Prime Minister of Australia the other day. He called him that guy from down under. I mean,
there have been some others.
Yeah.
Well, let's take some phone calls, too. And by the way, if you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. Since we've been talking about Arizona, which is going to be kind of a battleground state next year, Martha, KNLB, you have the floor. What would you like to add to our conversation?
Well, actually, I'd like to get some more information from you guys about what we can do.
Did we lose her?
Did we lose you? Well, that didn't help. We'll put her on hold and see if we can get her back there again. She was asking, of course, about Senator Sinema, for example. She's not on the ballot. Mark Kelly is.
Right.
Mark Kelly only won by 2%. It seems to me that, and again, I'll leave it to our listeners out there in Arizona to talk about whether or not they're going to come up with a viable candidate. But when you look at Arizona, Georgia, New Hampshire, and Nevada, any one of those four, if indeed the Democrats lose one of those, unless they pick up something like a Missouri or Pennsylvania, which are the only ones I can see as really vulnerable on the Republican side, then you don't have a 50-50 anymore. You have a 51-49. You have a 52-48. And so that's in the Senate. Now, in the House, I don't see any possible way. Again, I'm sitting across from the guy that talks about the circular firing squad and all that, but still, again, actually snapping and snatching any kind of defeat out of the jaws of victory is always a possibility, but it's really hard to imagine how, when you start in January of 2022, that you don't end up with, or 23, when you don't end up with an individual that is by the name of Kevin McCarthy and not Nancy Pelosi.
Probably so. And I think one thing, if the GOP really wants to, the best thing for the GOP in the House races is if Donald Trump will stay out of them.
That's what I was going to add to the conversation. Yes,
because
whether it helps or hurts,
exactly, because there's still a divide within the Republican Party over people that really, really love him and people that really, really hate him, and there's not much middle ground within Republican primary voters, people that are going to come out and vote for those Republicans running, in the general. And the best thing he can do is stay out of it, not make it about him. Make it about those make each race an individual referendum on Joe Biden.
I agree with that completely. I don't think he's going to do that, though.
No, I don't either. But to the degree that he can, he can't be in every race, but if there's a close one, maybe stay out of that one and turn that individual race into a referendum on the Biden agenda. If you're the Republican running against the Democrat, the incumbent Democrat, you tag them with everything Joe Biden has done. Every vote this person casts is a vote for the Biden agenda, and you make it about that agenda.
One of the other things I want to put on the table is I tend to read some of the things put out by various Democratic strategists, and they think that their ace in the hole is going to be the fact that they're going to send the vice president, I'm smiling while I say this, out there to energize the base. And I just have trouble.
I would love them to send the vice president out.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I mean, really? That's your best That's your best strategy.
The emptiest pantsuit in the history of Washington, D.C.
Having said that, it may be better than sending Joe Biden out there.
Yeah.
We'll see. Anyway, let's take a break. We got some more issues on the table, quite a few more, so we'll get to those right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Khaldun Swice admits that reaching your secular friends with the gospel is difficult, but there are things we can do to be more effective. He and I have worked together at the International Society of Christian Apologetics, so I was excited to see many commentators like Ed Stetzer and Eric Metaxas quoting him. Khaldun says we make a mistake when we ignore the trends and zeitgeist of the times, and we make grave mistakes when we try to stereotype people into this or that category. Sometimes the best starting point is to ask a question. When someone tells him that they don't believe in God, he asks, "What God do you not believe in?" He says that 9 times out of 10, it is usually a God that we Christians don't believe in. He has 3 principles we should adopt so that we can be more effective in reaching our secular friends. First, we must engage. He says we should sit at the table where we have the attention of your secular friends. Connect with them by getting involved with Apple computers, with Congress, or with sports. We'll be more effective if we sit at the table where most decisions are made by government, culture, media, and education. Second, we must inquire. That means we need to turn the table to listening and asking good questions. The Bible admonishes us to let your speech always be gracious and seasoned with salt. He tells of a student who told him that he did not believe in anything that is not physical. Khaldun asked him if his idea was physical. After all, not believing in anything that is non-physical is a non-physical idea. Third, we should edify. That means we should reach across the table and learn to love people redemptively. The gospel is ultimately about relationships, and we can demonstrate the truth of the gospel through love. These principles will help you be more effective in reaching your secular friends. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Go deeper on topics like you hear on Viewpoints by visiting pointofview.net. Pointofview.net.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, we're going to spend just a few minutes in just a minute talking about some of the things on YouTube and social media. But while we're talking about campaigns, one in the future, there's one right now, and that is you have the former governor, Terry McAuliffe, who many people have said handed his Republican opponent, Glenn Youngkin, probably the best line, because in this debate, and I watched it just thinking, no, he didn't say that, did he? Oh, he really did say this. I'm not going to let parents come into schools and actually take books out and make their own decision. First of all, show me how many times a parent has been able to get a book out of a library. But the line that is going to live in infamy, I don't think parents should be telling schools what they should teach. Lathan Watts, you've worked in various campaigns. That is the gift that will keep on giving.
Absolutely. I mean, that's a radio ad, TV ad, mail piece that writes itself. I mean, all you got to do is put his picture and that quote and send it out. And you send it to all of the, especially those people in Loudoun County, Virginia, where you've been seeing the school board meetings get so raucous. Where Matt Walsh showed up, and then they changed the rules so that you had to be a resident there. So then Walsh rented a house so that he could show up the next time.
And then they gave him 60 seconds, and he got out in 60 seconds.
He
pretty
did.
Good.
Yeah, he made the most of it. But you're exactly right. When I saw that quote, I was like, there's your next radio ad. There's your next TV ad. There's your next mail piece. I wouldn't say anything else if I was the Republican candidate. I would just I'd go around the state of Virginia quoting Terry McAuliffe.
Yes.
That's all I'd do.
And there was a time in which you had to hide your agenda. I remember years ago, this was when Marlon Maddox was the host, so this really goes back decades almost, where there was a statement made in some of the material from the Ohio educational policy saying that children are the wards of the state. And it somehow slipped in there, and everybody backpedaled, then looking for the tall grass, because nobody would want to say what basically now Terry McAuliffe has said. Many people in the Biden administration have now said.
Believe that, yeah.
And so in some respects, what before was, well, we believe it, but we just don't dare say that in public. Now they're just bold enough to say it in public.
They are. And then they sort of try to backtrack sometimes later on. But, Virginia was for a long time a red state. It has been turning blue in large part because of people in Washington, D.C., moving to Northern Virginia to escape the taxes in Washington, D.C. and the crime and other things, even though they're liberals who are doing that. So they're trying to turn Virginia into the Washington, D.C.
Right.
But it's still close enough that if you end up making some mistakes, Virginia can turn red again, and we might end up seeing a Republican governor coming out there.
And that's kind of one of the bigger issues, is that there is a real battle right now on who controls the schools. And you can go all the way back to the argument that was being made by Ronald Reagan that we need to get rid of the Department of Education. For people that don't know, it used to be HEW, the E was for education, then created a separate Department of Education. And so he ran with the idea that we would dismantle the Department of Education. But then we got a couple of people in there like Bill Bennett and even the Undersecretary Gary Bauer, and we said, well, we kind of like those people. And so the agenda of actually demoting the Department of Education never really took place. But now there is such an emphasis, especially on the side of the Democratic Party, that all the educational policy must be mandated from Washington, D.C., that I do believe this is getting to be an issue, because you're seeing people showing up at school boards, not just over the teaching of critical race theory, but the fact that they're transgender agendas. There is a level of education of sex that is so offensive that when they read this at the school board members object to reading out loud what the students get to read. And I do see this backlash from some of these parents as being something that's going to happen for some time, don't you think?
Yeah, during the Obama administration, the Department of Education started issuing various guidance for colleges, for their dorm rooms and other things. And that was sort of addressing transgender issues, whether or not males who are accused of some kind of sexual assault have the ability to be able to defend themselves or those kinds of things. I mean, it was amazing sort of transformation. Trump came in and tried to pull those back to some extent, but now I think we're going back even faster under the Biden administration.
And in this particular piece, you might wonder, why did this surface in the first place? Well, the governor actually had vetoed a piece which would have alerted parents that there was sexually explicit content in the instruction materials. And I'd love to that gets into the religious liberty issue a little bit, Lathan, because we've always thought that if you're going to teach something that is controversial, sexually explicit, you'd have to opt in. Then people said, no, we're going to teach it and you have to opt out. But you can't opt out if you don't know it's going to be taught in the first place.
Of course. And the fact, even before you get to the content, the fact that they are teaching this stuff at the age they are teaching it.
Yes.
They're starting some of this stuff in kindergarten, first grade, second grade. These kids' minds are not ready for this. This sexualization of children is abhorrent.
Yes.
And people should be absolutely enraged over it. And some of them are, and thank God for that. And they're showing up at school board meetings, but it is not enough to show up at the school board meetings. You need people to start running for school board. And we got a long time before the next presidential election. But if this sort of thing keeps up, and I was advising a Republican candidate, I would say make 2 promises and 2 promises only, and you'll win this election. Especially if you're having it right now. I will work to end the Federal Department of Education, and I will fire Anthony Fauci on day 1, and you will win in a landslide.
Well, that gets us into the whole question of the vaccine and some of the rest. So one of the other articles, our third article, this comes from Dr. Michael Brown. He's been on the program with us before, and if you're not familiar, I was going to bring it up the other day, and I thought I'll wait till Friday because I have 2 very wise men sitting across from me. and that is where YouTube decided to ban some of these what are seen as anti-vaccine statements. Now, it's one thing to take some yahoo off of YouTube. It's quite another to take Robert Kennedy Jr. off and a variety of others. And what Michael Brown says, look, at the outset, let me say I'm not an anti-vaxxer myself. And frankly, I'll be very honest that really YouTube has treated his ministry and his organization fair about some of their videos that they have done. But that being said, we now have a situation in which anything that would be seen as raising a question about a vaccine doesn't get a hearing. And he says, think about this for just a minute, because we have millions of viewpoints on millions of subjects on things like YouTube, including what foods are or are not healthy, what diets are or are not healthy, what exercise regimes are or are not healthy, what drugs, different illnesses are or are not healthy. All of that is allowed, but no open discussion about what vaccines are or are not healthy. And I've really thought that's a pretty good point, is that we can talk about almost anything else and evaluate the back and forth of some of that and criticize it and put comments up here. But there's just no opportunity to have even kind of a reasonable discussion, an open discussion about some of these issues.
It's become very difficult. It's completely politicized. And I find this sort of strange and interesting. We were talking about the therapy for coronavirus. I hope that doesn't come as politicized as the vaccine issue.
Let's hope not, yes.
But, you had initially before the election last year, Democrats were criticizing the vaccine because they were saying, this is Trump. I won't take a vaccine that was made by Donald Trump, as if Donald Trump was making a vaccine or something. And then all of a sudden Joe Biden wins, and then they completely flip. And now you need to get to vaccination because of this. And it's been so politicized, Kirby. It's unbelievable. Vaccines have been politicized for a little while, but by and large, about 95% of the kids get the vaccines in public school. If you're going to public school, you've got to get the vaccination. And most people live with it. There's a certain percentage that opt out for conscientious reasons. But all healthcare is getting politicized now, including the CDC. The media accused the CDC of being politicized under Donald Trump. It is much worse under Rochelle Walensky. Donald Trump, Joe Biden says, we need to get these boosters out here. And the CDC says, I'm going to override the panel, and we're going to say we're going to have the boosters because Joe Biden needs it.
Yes. And I think there were only 2 people on that panel that voted to actually have the boosters, right?
Right.
And all the others voted against it. And so, again,
it may be the CDC is actually right in that, but who knows, because it's so politicized.
Yes. And so when you have a sitting member of a cabinet override the people that are giving them advice, then you would say, well, okay, sometimes they have the right to do so. But then, especially, and we'll get to this when we talk about the generals, when you have individuals that are generals saying, we told one thing to Joe Biden, and yet he said something different, then you are in a difficult situation. So we have a lot more to cover, including some of the other things in this very good piece by Michael Brown. So we'll get to that in just a minute. In terms just of the idea of free speech and whether or not YouTube is going to be an honest platform, or whether they're going to start picking out certain things they define as misinformation when they are certainly not willing to define as misinformation other things about diet and a variety of other topics. So we'll get into that, and we will come back and also take your phone calls. 1-800-351-1212. Be right back.
Having civil conversations about important issues seems to be harder and harder. Various media outlets tell people what they should believe, why they should be outraged, and getting people to actually think, well, it can be difficult. Whether it's the gospel, tax issues, social policy, or just about anything else, you need to have solid information and clear thinking to address the hard issues. You need God's truth applied. And that's what you get in less than 2 minutes with Point of View's Viewpoints Commentary, a daily resource to help you be informed and think through the things we need to be talking about. It is free and will arrive in your inbox each day when you visit pointofview.net/signup. Sometimes we know we should say something, but we're silent because we're not quite sure what to say. Viewpoints Commentary can help you break the silence and change the narrative. It can make you a more equipped agent for truth. Get your free subscription to the Viewpoints commentary at pointofview.net/signup. pointofview.net/signup. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Final half hour, if you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. I know on Friday, a lot of you have said you just would rather sit back and listen, sometimes take notes. Sometimes it comes fast and furious, and you want to listen to it again, which you can do by going to the website, pointofview.net, and download the podcast, which I did the other day for one of the interviews that was done, or you can watch it, or simply go to YouTube and find that out. Our third article, though, is why YouTube's banning of anti-vaxxers is so ominous. And as we were coming to the break, we were talking about the fact that we can have a debate about what foods are healthy and what diets are healthy or what are not, and all sorts of things like that. But even to take it out of health for just a minute, which has been so politicized, I really appreciate Dr. Michael Brown's been on the program with us many times before, because he raises the broader question, and this is about free speech and a free interchange of ideas. Should a video with blatant misinformation about the Bible be permitted on YouTube, even if it'll lead many people astray spiritually? And he said, well, the answer, yes, it should be permitted. What about a video with misleading information about UFOs? Should that be permitted? Again, the answer is yes. But if you have a genuine, well-researched, carefully considered issues with vaccines in general, not to mention COVID vaccines in particular, your content will be banned on YouTube. And it gets us back to, religious liberty or First Amendment rights, right?
It does. It's not maybe in the very technical sense of a term, a First Amendment issue, because you're talking about a private
platform,
versus,
and I understand that.
Versus government.
YouTube can ban anything they want, but
right.
Again, if you believe in free speech, and theoretically they do.
And the real problem is that, and if anything is going to be done, from the government towards YouTube, it's not going to be on First Amendment grounds. It's likely going to be on consumer protection, because they, at least initially, held themselves out as just a wide open platform. Anybody can come on here and put whatever video you want. Same thing with some of the social media companies, that we just provide the platform and you put whatever content on here that you want. But that's not what they're doing. They claim one thing and they do something completely different, which is they censor things that they don't like, that don't fit, quote, their guidelines, their standards, or whatever that may be. And that's a problem. That is a consumer protection issue. And so I think if the FCC or whoever is going to take any sort of action related to this, number one, they won't under this administration, but if they ever do in the future, it would likely be from a consumer protection standpoint, to say you're holding yourself out as one thing, but you're acting as something completely different. Right. And it's fine. You're a private company. You want to ban all conservative viewpoints from YouTube? That's your business, but you have to be upfront about it and say that's what you're going to do, and not keep telling people, oh yeah, this is a free exchange of ideas, when it's clearly not. The free market works with ideas. The answer to speech that you don't like is more speech. It's not to shut down the speech that you don't like. It is to argue with it. It is to disprove it. So yeah, the author of the article is right. People, should they be allowed to post something that's misleading about Scripture? Yes. And then you should be able to post something that points out that they're being misleading about Scripture. It's when that company decides which point of view we're going to allow on YouTube. And if that's what you're going to do, then you have to at least be open and honest about it and transparent about what are the standards and how are you applying them, and are you applying them equally to everybody.
And the problem they're facing, of course, is that they've got liberals mad at them, they've got conservatives mad at them.
I understand.
And if they can't get this right some way or the other, they're liable to face legislation from either the right or the left that comes in and tries to adjust it. And if the legislation comes in, it's almost certainly going to make it worse. However they do it.
Always.
Well, and one of the questions I wanted to ask of Lathan is, this is a company that can define what speech is allowed, but can a company, say like Alaska Airlines, define what can or cannot be said by one individual flight attendant, Lacey Smith, who merely asked a question, and that was enough to get fired. And of course, you're fighting this case right now. So some people might say, well, I don't care what's on YouTube. Well, I do fly on Alaska Airlines. And matter of fact, the other day I was in San Francisco Airport and I see somebody, it's a flight attendant with Alaska Airlines. I was so tempted to come up and say, do you know who Lacey Smith is? And just see if you were even aware in the company what's going on right now.
Yeah, so Alaska Airlines, on their employee intranet, so kind of think like an internet message board kind of situation, they put a post on there about the Equality Act and how Alaska Airlines was all in support of the Equality Act, and they encouraged feedback from the employees.
Yes.
Okay, so that's an important thing to remember. They
sounds like
asked
YouTube
for feedback.
We went open.
Here's the company's position. We'd love to hear your comments.
What's your
on
thoughts? Yeah.
And Lacey Smith posted a question: do you, as a company, believe it's possible to regulate or legislate morality? And for asking that question, Alaska Airlines' position was that even discussing sexuality or gender identity in terms of morality is discriminatory, and it warranted her being fired from her job.
And she's one of two that
one
you're
of two
representing.
of our clients.
Yeah.
Exactly right.
We don't even know the name of the other one because
Right.
of so much persecution.
Yeah, exactly. So we have filed 2 charges of discrimination against Alaska Airlines with the federal EEOC, and so we have to kind of wait for the EEOC to go through their procedure, and hopefully, we'll get these folks vindicated. I don't know if they ever want to go back to work for Alaska Airlines or not, but at the very least, the EEOC needs to make it clear to Alaska Airlines and every other woke corporation in America that you can't do this. This is blatant discrimination on the basis of religion, because her question about it was rooted in her religious beliefs. Her opposition to the Equality Act and the other flight attendants are rooted in their religious beliefs. And, if you ask for feedback, you can't fire people when you don't like the feedback. So stay tuned. Hopefully we'll have updates on that, but it is the EEOC. They have plenty of procedures I'm sure they have to go through. It may be a while, but we're willing to stand with her and take this fight as far as we have to.
What I thought was so interesting is Senator Marco Rubio from Florida filed a legislation that would require corporate directors to prove that their woke corporate actions were in the best interest of the shareholders, or if not, then would allow them to bring a suit. And so in order to avoid liability for the breach of fiduciary duty, which again is a lot of big words for saying if you do something that's actually harming the company with all of this, then it would open them up to personal liability, because there has been this desire to just purge some of these companies with anybody that might have a Christian perspective, a conservative perspective. If the shoe were around the other way and you had a conservative organization purging out individuals that maybe wanted to support Bernie Sanders or thought that AOC is just the epitome of the best legislator we've ever had, you would have a screaming from the media. But so far, this has been allowed on one side or the other. And it kind of gets back to this whole idea of YouTube banning. Yes, you are a corporation. You can set the rules. But then when you say, let's have an open debate, as soon as you hear something you don't like, well, I'm going to either censor you and ban you from YouTube, or I'm going to fire you from a corporation.
Years ago, the corporations, by and large, wanted to stay out of this stuff.
Yes, they did.
They wanted to make their products or services and sell them, and they tried to be the corporation to address. They were just trying to do their job. Liberals got very good at boycotting these organizations and other things. I've been at one of the hotels in Chicago when a big group of liberals were circling around there, shouting various kinds of things, and it was kind of interesting. But the company managers, the CEOs, would come up and say, "How did I just make this go away? I don't want this attention." Yeah. And so they'd say, "Well, give money to Rainbow." Was Rainbow Push? Was that what it's called, or something like that? Jesse Jackson's group, or Al Sharpton's group, or something, and then you find these things go away. But they wanted, those groups said, we want more now. We want you to do various things, and we want you to affirmatively approve these things. And corporations have got themselves in a mess by doing this.
And it's going to take shareholders taking action. I really do think. Obviously, we're defending these 2 flight attendants, these individuals. But if this ever is going to stop, this sort of woke corporate activism, it's going to take shareholders. It's going to take the people who own stock in the company, sort of like you see the parents show up at the school board. It's going to take shareholders showing up at the annual shareholders meeting and getting up and berating these folks publicly in front of the rest of the shareholders that, why can't you guys just fly people to Alaska? That's what you're in business to do.
Sure.
I bought stock in this company because I wanted it to be profitable. And, why can't you just do your job? Why, stay out of politics.
Yeah, stay out of the culture wars.
Yeah.
Yeah. And again, I've been to some of those meetings at the Morton Meyerson. They do, of course, the Exxon, and I've been to those where you have the pro-homosexual, you had some of the environmental groups and all of that, and we just need to show up there as well. And a lot of people say, what can I do? I said, well, you first of all need to figure out who you're going to vote for, and first in the primary and then the general election, but there may be an opportunity if you're a shareholder to express some of your opinion there as well. So just thought I'd bring some of those First Amendment issues up, free speech and religious liberty. But when we come back from the break, remember the TV show? It's still out, Jeopardy. Well, we've got a very good piece by Dr. Merrill Matthews, and we're going to see if you can answer some of those questions right after this.
When global warming began losing credibility as an environmental catastrophe, the left substituted the term climate change because there is no doubt that the climate is changing. It always has. Progressives act very panicky and claim that if they get enough money and power, they can somehow lessen the bad effects of climate change. Their real goal, however, is to re-engineer the entire energy economy. Of the $3.5 trillion in the White House and Congress's proposed spending bill, about $2 trillion is reportedly earmarked for climate-related measures. Much of the spending is aimed at getting American companies and individuals to quit using fossil fuels. They claim this will reduce global temperatures, but their studies show only minimal reductions. Fossil fuels are still the best way to provide cheap, abundant, and reliable electricity, and innovation is making them cleaner all the time. Renewables, namely wind and solar, are not always available when you need them. It's expensive and often impossible to obtain the electricity to back them up. Hence, in California, environmentalist poster child for central planning, blackouts are a near daily event. The Wall Street Journal reported record sales of home generators to Californians this summer. As millions of Californians leave a state where joblessness, cost of living, and overregulation are making their lives harder, Congress is actually considering 2 bills which take California's policies national. The Senate's $1 trillion bill for infrastructure provides a down payment on the effort to banish carbon from the U.S. economy. The proposal tasked Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg with rolling out a national electric vehicle charging network. EVs are more expensive even with government subsidies. Yet, as the Journal explains, liberals believe that building more chargers in low-income areas will encourage more EV sales. This type of incentive has failed in California. This EV push is just one of many drastic transformations funded by the legislation being considered in Washington, D.C. Central planning cannot spawn a thriving economy. We should not fund such arrogance. For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for a few more minutes, and we thought we might play Jeopardy of sorts, and that's exactly the title of this piece, which we've just posted here on the website, pointofview.net. It's by Dr. Merrill Matthews, and I remember reading it, and he mentioned it when we came into the studio. I said, okay, let's add that one because it was kind of fun, because what you do, Dr. Matthews, is you have some quotes, and this is from a recent New York Times article, and then you have to guess, and I'll give you 4 of these, of whether or not this came from the dictator Xi Jinping or whether it came from President Joe Biden. And there's occasionally a word that's a tip-off, but it's really interesting. So let's go around the table here. First one, the president says, we will pursue common prosperity, pressing businesses and entrepreneurs to help narrow the stubborn wealth gap that could hold back the country's rise and erode public confidence in the leadership. What about that?
Well, since I wrote it, I know, but I'll say it sounds like Elizabeth Warren and AOC to me.
Yeah, I would guess that's a Biden quote.
And it turns out the key there is the word common prosperity. That's something, if you know a little bit about China, you know they use that phrase. But if you just talked about trying to reduce the wealth gap, oh my goodness, that's Bernie Sanders, that's AOC, that's Elizabeth Warren, that's Joe Biden, and all of that. And so that one, except for that little phrase, was the only tip-off. The second one, officials are pledging to make schooling, housing, and health care less costly, more evenly available outside big cities, and to lift incomes for workers, helping more people secure a place in the middle class.
I would call that the Democrats' $3.5 trillion.
Yeah, I mean that's the talking point for everything they want.
We'll help us out with some of these here.
Yeah. That was from President Xi.
Yeah. Again, isn't that amazing? Because the similarities are striking. Okay, two more. Just want to wear you out here. The common prosperity, again, that's the trouble with that one there, has converged with a crackdown on the country's tech giants to curb their dominance. And again,
what were we just talking about?
Yes, there you go. And would it not be fair to say Elizabeth Warren has wanted to do that, and there has been a real push? And to be fair, that's not only been a Biden issue, it's also been one that you've had certainly Senator Lee, Senator Cruz, and a number of others have talked about. So it's just interesting. And the last one, achieving common prosperity is not just an economic issue, it's a major political matter bearing on the party's foundation for rule. And again, if you took out the word common prosperity, because I know that's a Chinese phrase, that sounds again like the Democratic Party.
Yeah.
So again, the bottom line is all four of those are Xi Jinping, right?
All four of those are the head of the leading communist leader in the world.
And so if people sometimes say, well, my goodness, there's a real similarity between China and Joe Biden, there actually now seems to be some evidence of that, right?
In their platforms and even their concerns about the progress of the party.
And some of the economic benefits that they receive from it as well. Okay, while I'm talking about China for a few minutes, let's get to very quickly, and then we want to talk about the websites that both of you have, the fact that we did have the generals this week actually come and testify. And now this is CYA, I think, a little bit, because they want to say, no, we told President Biden that they should have 2,500 troops. And, of course, you can go back to the August interview with George Stephanopoulos, in which time and time again, on more than one occasion, George Stephanopoulos said, now, is that really true? Did you really say you did not hear any of that? And so there was a very clear statement. Obviously, somebody's not telling the truth. I think we know probably who it is. So that's the first issue. The other one is also General Milley spent some time contacting China and Chinese generals, alerting them as to whether or not we would have any kind of military action, which I think is a classic example of what we don't want to have, in which the military is doing foreign policy. We want the duly elected citizens to engage in that. So two issues that surface from the testimony. Any thoughts?
If Milley had a shred of integrity, he would have resigned. That's my thought.
Yes.
I mean, and
if
what
the
he
administration did, they would
and what he did, telling our number one enemy in the world, I will tell you ahead of time if we're going to attack, is I can't think of a better, if you look up treason, it should just say, see him. Okay, I mean, if we're not ever going to have another trial for treason in this country, then we just need to say so. But that is treasonous. And he can say all he wants to. Oh, no, these kinds of calls, happen between military leaders, all that. Maybe they do. But I would be willing to bet no general in China has ever called a general in the United States and said, hey, if we're actually going to attack you, I'll give you the heads up.
Because what would happen to him?
He'd lose his head. They would shoot him in the head, and they would bill the family for the bullet. That's what they would do.
So I'm going to take a different position because I don't know if we know all the facts on this yet.
And again, a lot of this goes to the Ken Woodward.
Because initially,
you're exactly
the Bob
right.
Woodward
What I
book,
should say is that if that's 100% accurate and there's nothing else to clarify, then you're exactly right.
And Newt Gingrich said something along the same lines as you did. And from my standpoint, when you've got a military person who's been doing this for a long time, I'm going to give them a little bit of doubt that this is that Bob Woodward may have gotten it wrong in some ways, because as I understand, they initially said this was this sort of a secret call, and I think Milley has come out and said, well, there's actually 15 people on the call. The State Department didn't know about it. Well, actually, a State Department person was on the call, and he didn't apparently tell the head of the State Department. So I'm not sure we know all this yet, but at any rate, it's kind of settled down a good bit, and I would be surprised if Milley had been acting treasonously. So I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt till we know more. But I'm not sure I actually accept Bob Woodward's case on this.
Yeah, well, and again, we always have to put the provisor or the caveat in there. But just before we run out of time, Dr. Merrill Matthews, we've quoted from 2 of your pieces today at ipi.org. And as people go there, not only are you writing, but a number of other scholars are writing very good pieces that I would encourage people to look for.
Right. Then go to ipi.org, and everything is available there, free to consume or share with other people.
And I might also go to Lathan Watts. Of course, we have, as you go there, it will take you to firstliberty.org. But you have to actually circulate around here because you've got extreme, Supreme Coup and a variety of others. So go to firstliberty.org and find some of the links. But again, the one that we were just talking about with Lacey Smith, that's one that's really kind of front and center right now.
It is, yeah. You can get more information about her case. Coach Kennedy's case is on its way to the Supreme Court. We've got another case in Maine that's going to be argued this term at the Supreme Court. We've got another case out of Virginia that we're going to be filing another Supreme Court petition. So there's a lot going on. FirstLiberty.org is sort of the home for all of this, and that's the best place to get in touch with us.
With this administration, you'll probably have even more come a little later in the fall.
Let me mention one other thing, too. First Liberty Live, just the other day, you had our good friend Mike Berry, and he is, of course, one of the general counsel and was a JAG lawyer, and it's all on the Department of Defense vaccine mandate. So for those of you that have somebody serving in the military right now and have some questions about that, that's a piece that you can actually watch, and that's also found at FirstLiberty.org, or you can go to First Liberty Live either way.
Yeah, First Liberty Live is kind of our own little in-house interview show, and so it's got its own little microsite, firstlibertylive.com, but you can find pretty much everything on the homepage there. And yeah, there's great interviews on that show, old episodes, but that one's certainly very timely with what's going on with the DOD.
So again, we encourage you to certainly visit all of the things that we have on the website. Next week, we're going to get into a couple of other key issues that I know you're going to really appreciate that, but you can go to firstliberty.org, ipi.org, and that is there. Again, we have some of these articles by Dr. Merrill Matthews, Cal Thomas, Michael Brown, and others, and so many great resources. So take the time to visit the website, pointofview.net. If you can click on that button that says donate, we certainly appreciate your financial support. We did okay during our Truth Team Week, but we certainly have a place for you to join with us as well. I want to thank Andrew and Steve for their help behind the scenes. Have a great weekend, and we'll see you back here on Monday, right here on Point of View.
Having civil conversations about important issues seems to be harder and harder. Various media outlets tell people what they should believe, why they should be outraged, and getting people to actually think, well, it can be difficult. Whether it's the gospel, tax issues, social policy, or just about anything else, you need to have solid information and clear thinking to address the hard issues. You need God's truth applied. And that's what you get in less than 2 minutes with Point of View's Viewpoints Commentary, a daily resource to help you be informed and think through the things we need to be talking about. It is free and will arrive in your inbox each day when you visit pointofview.net/sign-up. Sometimes we know we should say something, but we're silent because we're not quite sure what to say. Viewpoints Commentary can help you break the silence and change the narrative. It can make you a more equipped agent for truth. Get your free subscription to the Viewpoints Commentary at pointofview.net/sign-up. pointofview.net/sign-up. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.